Aura, looks like you have a question. Would you like to turn on your microphone and say your question?
Sure. I just had a question regarding Unilever and the banks. How did they come up with, I don't know how to phrase my question, but I want to know if Project Glow or EWAP had any involvement in their change of mind or their move towards implementing living wages in their organization. Yeah, that's kind of what I want to know.
Yeah, good question, Aura. The answer is I don't know. And we're trying to currently, we're trying to connect with Unilever to try and find out. I mean, I think the banks have taken their inspiration from the banks in New Zealand anyway, have taken their inspiration from the living wage campaign here in New Zealand. But I think the animation is something that will actually speed that kind of process along. And maybe there's ways that we can connect the work of the incubator to those organizations. So it is a really good question. And the fact that I don't know the answer is actually making the case for this meeting itself now. I hope I don't sound like I'm dodging the question, because I think it's a really good one. I don't know, Aura, but it would be good to know the extent to which evidence is actually getting into organizational decision making. And that's why the animation's been made, to accelerate that process, I think. So short answer, I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks, Stu. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think we could certainly build more bridges, eh? Yeah.
Thanks, Stu, and thanks, Aura, for that question. Inez has just popped into the chat that Unilever have been working with IDH, which is a Dutch sustainable group. And we actually have some people on the call from IDH today as well. So I don't know if any of them feel like they might be able to speak to it, but it would be great if so. Don't want to put anyone on the spot, though.
No.
But Inez has put a link in the chat, so you could follow that link to find out more about what they're doing.
Right. Gonzalo's working with us with the UN PSYOP team to try and reach out to Unilever to see if we can find out, some of the inner workings there. But it's such a big organization. Apparently it's been going on, they've had this in the works for a while. And, it's set to 2030 when they want it to be complete, but it's already well underway. So.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions popped up in the chat. Mahima has a question. Mahima, should I just read it out, or would you like to turn on your microphone and speak to it?
Maybe just read it out.
Maybe I'll just read it out. Okay. So Mahima's asking, what are the plans for using the animation for greater advocacy across the realms? So maybe that's not a question for Stu so much as a question for myself and Roz. Roz, would you like to take that one?
Sorry, I had a dog come into the room. Sorry.
So it's just a question about how the animation will be used for advocacy across the globe.
So we're making the animation freely available, and we'd like to collect from people how they're using it. We will be talking and using it with Living Wage Foundation and with Living Wage Scotland, both of whom are on this call. But again, that's something we're very keen to learn from in terms of the Impact Incubator, because it's joining the dots and seeing where things go to and working out how to collect that information that is exciting for us.
Thank you, Roz. Another question here from Christine. Christine, would you like to speak to your question, or should I read it out for you? I can go ahead and speak it if you like. So the question is, I think this one's for you, Stu. Competition with other countries for jobs seems to fuel the low wage, competitive wage arguments. How do we argue against this?
Wow, that's a big one. I guess I'm actually a believer in consumer power. So I think that well, I'll be interested to see why Unilever and so are doing what they're doing. Hopefully I'm sure there are ethical reasons for driving it, but there are consumer power reasons perhaps as well. I think the more we see coalitions, competitors daring to care, the better. I don't think there's an easy solution to that, because what you're talking about is part of the whole inequality mechanism that we've seen over the past few decades through globalization, where people can outsource to the cheapest provider or import the cheapest labor, the people who need the money the most to do the labor at the lowest rate. And that's a hard cycle to break. I don't think anybody's figured out how to do it. I do think, though, that the living wage is an idea that's big enough to put a stick in the spokes. And I think the animation is driving at that. It's going to take coalition, yeah? So SDG 17 is partnership, eh? It's the only process goal in the 17. And it talks about meetings like this and Unilever and the banks actually working together to try and stop the wages dropping lower and lower. So there isn't a clear mechanism, and it's only going to come about through more and more partnerships. I include consumers in those partnerships, because I think a lot of people would rather not buy from an organization that exploits workers. And the more we can see that happening, for example, in the paper I'm involved in with colleagues here around the table on the coffee bean, humble coffee bean, the more that's done in that, the fair trade space. I think fair trade is a huge thing here, to accredit brand, show consumers that this supply chain, this products come from a supply chain that has decent wages throughout. There may be an economic lever that will start to work in decent work's favour there. I don't have a clear answer to that, but it's certainly a major process that needs to be slowed down at the very least, and hopefully reversed. I'm talking too much. I'm sure other people have got better ideas.
No, that's great. Thanks, Stu. So just to mention, Carla from IDH has popped some information in the chat about a summit that they held with Unilever at the end of March. And there's a link there to a call to action that came from that meeting. She says 12 companies have now signed on to that. So there's more information about the Unilever and other companies there on the IDH website.
Ishbel, I'm just thinking of the Global Compact might have a role here too, eh?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
They're also very much engaged in the living wage discussions. And I believe they have some people who are working specifically on living wages as well.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a few more questions in the chat. So the next one comes from Joe Sylvester. She's saying, any advice for people who would like to start engaging in impact in relation to their work? So it's a fantastic question. Stu, do you want to just share what you think in terms of how to get impact from your work psychology work?
Yeah, well, I mean, that Hamilton City Council was a high point, and it matches the one that we had in AddUp years ago when we, an NGO took up some research and used it. When Ishbel, you were managing that project, that was a long time ago, but it's stayed with me. So I mean, it's getting into the room to make the case for that something's wrong with the way wages are currently structured, and the animation, I think, is going to be. I meant it when I said, if the animation had been available in 2020, it would have been really, really useful. It's available now, so that kind of and the game as well. So there are multiple ways. We are talking persuasion here, right? So evidence on its own is never going to be enough to change things. It has to be persuasive, and it also has to be cogent and clear. The animation that was the goal of the animation, to make it clear and cogent, and it has succeeded in that goal. In terms of workplaces, our own workplaces, I guess it would depend on the workplace and who you're working with. And, if you're working in HR, whether you can say you're working in an HR department in some organization and you think the wages are really on the low side, you do have information about the living wage, capital L, capital W, small l, small w, and you do have opportunities to put that evidence in front of people who make decisions. I'm actually thinking of Andrea's work here around, business cases that you shared with us in 2018, Andrea, that I thought was really groundbreaking. I think cost benefit analysis of some kind needs to come into the picture. I did talk briefly about it on that overall slide, but it's not my area, but you are in that space, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly in the UK, the use of the evidence on the business case has been really inspirational in moving the campaign forward. I know that evidence that we've collected about impact has really demonstrated how people have used those, quite detailed case studies, because it was quantitative and qualitative analysis and the methods there to move things forward, to persuade people, that they needed to take a more longer term view of things in particular.
Wow. You need to share that. I need to be reading that work, Andrea? Yeah.
I'll pass it back.
Yeah, thank you. That'd be great. Thank you.
I think another way that we can do this is in terms of having dialogues and going into spaces with people and seeing that as leading to a longer term discussion. We've got another paper that's actually in the EJWOP on their impact, myself and Caris Rice, that's looking at a process of knowledge exchange and dissemination, but actually that really critically changed our research trajectory through working with Professional Standards Authority, which is the main social health and social care regulator in the UK, to really help inform how we were researching things, but also what they were interested in, to make sure that there was an alignment of them. And I think more researchers have to think about their research and not look at it as a one-way exchange. Your research will be changed through these interactions as well.
Thanks very much, everyone, for that. So we have a few more questions. We have about 10 minutes left. So we'll start with Barbara, who you've got your hand up. So if you'd like to speak your question, please.
I would like to ask, because you show, and it's obvious for me, that the living wage is a construct between worker and organization. And I would like to ask if this construct, this idea, included also the concept of wage for care work. I mean, to take care for your relatives, for children, for old parents. This is also a topic, an area for a living wage.
Thanks, Barbara. Great question. Yes, Stuart, can you tackle that one?
Well, we know that care work is very poorly paid, and we know that during the pandemic, people were applauding care workers in the street as a sign of social appreciation. I don't know how much of that has gone into actual wage levels. I'm thinking some of those things we've been finding about the public sector approach here in New Zealand, Ishbel, might be relevant to that. But where jobs are reevaluated in terms of their skill level by comparing them with other jobs that are much better paid but actually have the same skills mix, and then saying, how can this be? And that's been done, I think, within the public sector. Barbara, it's a really good question. I mean, around the world, there's so many care workers working in precarious situations doing, incredible work. So, that would be a sector that is poorly paid that deserves a much better deal. And, I honestly don't know how much work is going into that particular sector. Does anyone else in the room know about initiatives for living wages there?
Certainly in the UK, we had a differentiation where our English government looked at a 1% increase for healthcare workers, whereas the Scottish government put in a 4% increase in recognition of all the work that people had done.
Well, it's a hard, and a lot of that work is in. I mean, even the 4%, that's quite low. And then, of course, a lot of the work that happens in care work is actually, it's not formal. A lot of it's informal. And I've just seen Mahima had a question about replicating the living wage for individuals working in the informal sector where Mahima works, which is the, that's 2/3 of the world's workforce are were before the pandemic were in the informal sector. And that's not something that work psychology is ever, not a realm that works with a few exceptions, and Mahima's work is one of the notable ones, where, and Charles also, where, Charles's work, where, Charles, you may want to speak to that as well, but Mahima, but the informal sector is, I don't know how that is going to work in the informal sector, because, as you say, Barbara, it's an agreement between the employer and the employee. Well, that can still happen in the informal sector, regardless of formality. But we, to be honest, work psychology has not ventured into that space very much. Let's be honest. And that's changing, yeah. Charles and Mahima, you're the two I know in the room who work the most in that space. I don't know if you want to.
Hi everyone. I got my mic to work, so I'm here.
Well done. Well done. Namaste. Yeah.
Namaste, Stu.
Okay.
Thank you for the great response, Ross, and thank you for the excellent talks. There was just so much to learn there. As I was looking at the paper, I was thinking about the graphs that you were presenting, and I was thinking, how do I go about replicating some of this work in the informal economy? So you'd mentioned that some of this was replicated, I believe you said Philippines, China. I'm thinking about the informal workers in India right now, and I'm thinking how I would love to know if and what would be that living wage threshold here. How do I go about replicating it?
I wouldn't replicate it. I would do what you think works in your context. I know you've done that work with the potters and the weavers, and you've used more of an ethnographic approach. Andrea mentioned both qualitative and quantitative work. They're not inconsistent with one another. And I know that our colleagues in Thailand have been working both across quantitative and qualitative techniques in the hospitality sector, for example. Finding ways to do the work that fits your context and, is respectful towards different worldviews. I don't know, Mahima, there's so much diversity in the room of ways that can be approached. But if people know when their quality of life is transformed from being a real slog to, they can actually time to think and get on with living here. There is a difference, and I think it is probably more of a qualitative difference than a quantitative. But you still need to set a number somewhere if you're going to have this concept of a living wage, capital L, capital W, and it will vary. It's not one size fits all. I think you've done a lot of the work already, Mahima. You've been in that space for a while, and I know you're doing more right now.
Thank you, Stu. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Ros, would you like to do a final farewell?
So I just wanted to share with you, Ishbel's talked about what we're doing in terms of the decent work agenda, but kind of allied to this, we've also got another animation that we're launching that's looking at threats and securities. And we kind of see that decent work is the kind of positive side of this, but threats and securities is kind of the negative side in terms of you don't pay people living wages, then you may be creating increased risk to your organization. So you can sign up for that straight away in terms of our impact incubator site, if you would be interested in doing that. And so that's on the 8th of June. Again, it's a morning event, and it will have a lot more speakers talking about different aspects of the science, but we also will be doing further launches, and we will keep you up to date in terms of that. So I'd really like to thank Ishbel and Stuart and also Frederick for just making this such an exciting event, and all of you. We had, as I said, 73 people sign up for this event. I do know that there were some people who had a few problems getting into the space, and we'll hope to fix that in the future. I'm going to put into the chat a link for some feedback, because we know this is our first one. We've got lots of learning to do. I particularly have lots of learning to do about the technology. So please do help us here. But also what you'll see in terms of that feedback is it's specifically asking you, is this useful and how will you use it, so that we can try and message you and stay in touch about how you're going to be applying this, because we're really keen to create resources that will help give you fuel to have these conversations in different ways. So please help us do that. But also, as Isabel said, please help us if you can provide, we've got the scripts, if you can provide the translation so that that will be available in your language. Again, that helps us spread so that language isn't the barrier to the message going forward. But I'd really like to thank everyone who's participated in the chat. We've saved the chat. And we will be coming back and having conversations with you. So thank you for being part of the conversation. This is going to be an ongoing one, and building our voices, but also building our connections to help us have much more impactful conversations all the way through. So thank you for your time today. Thank you.